This week on Movies Baby, Netflix spent $325 million on something called The Electric State, and everybody seems to universally agree that it's one of the biggest pieces of shit ever sold to the public as a feature film. But does that necessarily mean, just talking about the finances, does that necessarily mean that The Electric State is bad for Netflix? How does this whole streaming thing work? What's going on with streaming? We'll dig into the numbers and the state of streaming. But first, Joe, let's look at what was a dismal weekend at the box office and see if there's any hope on the horizon for movies. Carson, show me the money. And by the money, I, of course, mean the weekend box office returns, baby. Here we go. Yikes. Joe, we don't have a single movie on this weekend's box office returns that made over $10 million. Nothing in double digits, not a single movie cracking $10 million. I went back and looked because we've been doing this show for a year now. Congratulations, by the way, on our 1 year anniversary. And over the course of the last year, we've been keeping a close eye on the old box office. And so my first thought was, well, I was like, I know this hasn't happened since we've been doing the show. It's at least been a year since this has happened. And sure enough, I had to go back to February 9th, 2024, over a year ago, which was the, you'll, of course, even though we weren't doing the show, you'll, of course, remember the second weekend of Argylle and the first weekend of Lisa Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Was a huge week for Hollywood. JK, it was the last time that a single movie did not make over $10 million at the box office for a weekend. So this is, not surprisingly, the slowest weekend of 2025 so far. It was worse even than Super Bowl weekend. And specifically, we have Novocaine. We have a new number one, Novocaine, which made $8.7 million on an $18 million budget. So not a bad opening. But Paramount was hoping that this would open at around $10 million, so it underperformed a little bit. I think they probably based that on the fact that Companion, another Jack Quaid movie earlier this year, did $9.3 million, but it had the harder plot to market because it was trying to like conceal a twist and not give too much away. Whereas Novocaine is all just about simple premise, simple execution of a simple premise. Yeah. And so I think they were hoping to do 10, but 8.7 on an $18 million budget. I'm sure overall they're not going to sweat that. And also, when we were talking about Companion, a lot of that data was really suggesting that Sophie Thatcher was the big draw for that movie, right, more so than Jack Quaid.
And it was a horror movie, which of course has that, going for it.
Absolutely. But they'll live with 8.7. The bigger problem is that that's the only success story of the week, the only thing that could remotely be considered a success, because the Mickey 17 bomb continues. It had a 60% drop after a disappointing start, so it's only up to $90.5 million worldwide. That's on a $120 million production budget. Not good. It's going to have to get close to like $250 million at least to see profit. It's nowhere close to that right now, and so it's not surprising that they already announced a streaming date for Mickey 17. It's coming out on streaming later this month, so it's going to come out on streaming the same month that it was released in theaters. I'm sure that was not the ideal version of events. That was not the plan. And we'll talk more about streaming in a second here. And then Black Bag, this is disappointing because we're going to review Black Bag. Spoiler, we both really liked it. Soderbergh, second movie of the year with writer David Koepp, and this thing was not cheap. Unlike some of these recent Soderbergh movies, Presence, Kimmy, etc. This thing had a $50 million budget, had a lot of stars in it. It only brought in 7.5 opening weekend. That is not great. Universal isn't happy about that. It's a shame. It's a great movie. It doesn't feel like they marketed it that much. I mean, were you seeing a lot of Black Bag advertisements around?
No.
I mean, we're across from Universal, so they have a billboard out. But
Right.
Beyond that, I don't think there was a lot of Black Bag advertisements going on. Now there was one bigger, well, before I get to the big winner of the week, Joe, any takeaways, or is this just a sort of predictably blah?
No, just to add to what you're saying, the Looney Tunes movie underperformed, which is of note for Warner.
Yes, that's right.
Looney Tunes is a big IP. People were bemoaning this weekend that Warner quickly pulled the catalog off of their Max premium service, kind of as a Zaslav, the CEO of Warner, sort of saying, "See, I told you, Looney Tunes isn't being handled properly." And then the other thing I'd say is that Neon's The Monkey in its fourth week was able to add another 2.5 for a $35 million domestic till, which is just like a nice, it was a nice number 4 weeks in for The Monkey, Brett. But that's my takeaways.
So no slowing down the Osgood Perkins train, unfortunately.
Not even kind of.
Not yet.
I would get his
Not
new
yet.
movie into production. I'm sure they.
It's
have.
into production.
I'm sure they have.
It already has like a release date. It's coming out in
People are
frickin'
already
September.
going.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, what?
People are already
At
lining
it.
up at the Vista
People
for
are-
that
yeah.
Q&A.
Mhm.
Now, Joe, there is another movie that premiered this week that had a production budget of $320 million, but it doesn't show up anywhere in the box office top 10. How does that make any sense? Of course, I'm talking about Netflix's The Electric State, directed by the Russo Brothers, who are best known as the directors of Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, two of the top 10 highest-grossing movies of all time. So even though the Russos have seen bigger budgets before, most directors have never been anywhere close to a budget like this. $320 million makes The Electric State, and if you're saying, what's The Electric State? I don't blame you. This was not marketed very widely outside of Netflix, but it does have the 13th biggest budget of all time. This is the 13th most expensive movie in history, and it is the most expensive streaming-only release by far. I went down to like the top 60 most expensive movies of all time. No other streaming movies. This one, this is the most expensive streaming movie by a mile. And although that number has neither been confirmed nor denied by Netflix, it is, when you watch it, it is not hard to believe this movie cost $320 million. The problem with it is not that it looks cheap. It looks. You could say it looks bad, but it does not look cheap. It looks expensive, from the detailed CGI to this enormous ensemble cast to this like jukebox soundtrack that cost a fortune on its own, probably, to license all those songs. This movie looked like they were trying to spend a lot of money. So Joe, when it comes to streaming, what does this number mean, though, and how would Netflix gauge success on a budget this exorbitant? And this has to do a lot with sort of the distinctions between streaming and theatrical, because we don't want to make the mistake of sort of acting like a theatrical budget is the same as a streaming budget. But give us some context here. What does this number, this impossibly big number, mean for Netflix, and how would they gauge if it's a successful use of money or not?
$320 million is a lot. But do you want to hear an actual big number? Do you know the amount of money Netflix is going to spend on content this year? I'll tell you. $18 billion. $320 million is not a ton of money when your global budget for content creation is $18 billion. Netflix has 300 million subscribers all over the world, and they make shows and movies for 50 different countries, 50 territories. They have added millions of people last quarter to their platform, and now they have $18 billion more to look at this year and say, what are we going to spend it on? What has traditionally worked at Netflix won't surprise you. It is unscripted, is big at Netflix. That's everything from Logan Paul fighting Mike Tyson or Jake Paul or whatever, like live events like that. As well as sort of true crime, Who Killed John Benet Ramsey. There's that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Other big sectors for them, of course, include scripted, and a big part of their business is, of course, movies, of which any Netflix executive would tell you, of all the studios, they are the most nominated at the Emmys, at the Oscars, at the Golden Globes, year after year after year.
Still don't have that Best Picture, though. Still waiting on that Best Picture win.
So I think what I'm driving at is, it's a great question. What does a loss look like for Netflix? Well, how does Netflix assess value? Netflix is looking for engagement metrics, like time retained on the platform, as sort of a analytic that determines whether or not people subscribe. So anyway, subscriptions are up. Profit is up. Netflix won the streaming wars without a doubt. They wanted to disrupt television. They disrupted it forever, and they became the biggest television company in the world. So now they're licensing podcasts on their platform and paying millions of dollars to have people like Pat McAfee on ESPN sort of scenario. They've signed big deals with Miss Rachel. So they're going into the creator economy and they're rummaging around. Amazon had Mr. Beast's show that they put on their platform. So they're going into the creator economy and they're rummaging around. So what I'm saying is, whether they're pulling from the creator economy, Miss Rachel, whether they're going to the movie studios like Agbo, the Russo Brothers production company, and working with them, or working on television shows. Netflix is doing it all, and they're doing it all at a humongous and very successful rate. So in isolation, what do I think the electric state is doing here? Well, first of all, like you mentioned, Brett, streaming finances are a little different than regular movies. Long story short, on a regular movie production, people participate in the back end, aka you're deferring a certain amount of payment because you're all betting on yourself to get awarded sort of equity on the project, and when it makes money, you get points on the back end. But at streaming services, everything is up front, which is very, very valuable to artists. Duh. So why is the number 320? It's because like you had to pay Chris Pratt not 10 in points, you had to give him 60. Millie Bobby Brown, it's not, I don't know what these people cost, but you have to pay all that money up front.
And you also have to, with the theatrical release, you have to give a large percentage of the gross revenue to the theaters.
That's exactly.
Whereas Netflix does not have to give a large. So with a theatrical release, you have to make, it used to be 2 times, you really have to make 2.5 times your production budget to see profit with a theatrical release. With a streaming release, they don't, however they sort of evaluate how much money they've made, they don't have to make as much money as a theatrical release has to make in order to see profit. And for comparison, I saw somebody saying that like if this was at a studio, it would have been a little under $200 million probably.
Right. Because of the way that's all set.
Still a lot of money.
Still a lot of money. Still wouldn't say it if that was a theatrical model. Still wouldn't say it for many other studios. I don't even know if I'd say it for Netflix. What I'm saying is Netflix will like survive. It doesn't really matter. In the past 2 or 3 years, they've had an emphasis on big event pictures, a la Electric State, with like just huge movies like The Gray Man. Is that the other Russo brother movie?
Yes.
Gray Man.
Yeah,
they have
Red
these like
Notice with Gal Gadot.
They put out these exactly. They put out these huge movies, and you know what? They get eyeballs, Brett.
Red Notice had 231 million views according to Netflix measurements.
Okay, so look, Netflix is insanely
That's
smart.
their most popular movie ever, by the way.
They will, and they're making a sequel. Oh, not Red Notice. Sorry, they're making a Gray Man sequel.
Are they really?
Yes. Wow. So here's
They're really in the Russo Brothers.
Well, here's
business.
Here's some reasons maybe why. Number one, the Russo brothers made 2 of the most highest grossing movies of all time. Yes, they were Marvel movies, but whatever, they made them. But I think more importantly is sort of Agbo's ambitions in the AI space.
And that's the Russo Brothers production company,
yes.
Agbo. Yeah.
So after they make Doomsday and Secret War,
the new Avengers movies,
those are,
yep.
Then what the Russo brothers are also doing parallel with that is developing AI tools at their production company Agbo, and they have tons of funding and filming for that. I think that it's good business to keep the Russo brothers in the mix for Netflix. They make huge event pictures, and they are technically and infrastructurally like very developed at Agbo, and all of their services they have in Atlanta and all the things that they can do there. And I think they're just like, and by the way, like the Electric State, like stepping back for a second and divorcing yourself from our hatred of the Russo brothers. It's just like, good IP, Russo brothers, 300 million, let's give it a whirl.
It's
like
Netflix.
Who gives a shit?
They are in too
give it a
big.
whirl.
They might be in too big to fail territory where the numbers just stop. They just need to keep doing big things.
Here's what I'll say.
They just need scale and scope.
Maybe. Or they might see the Electric State numbers come back, and they might say, never mind, we're doing Rebel Ridges. Give me 70 million action movies because it's getting the same number of eyeballs. Or they might say, oh, wait, this worked really well because of A, B, and C. But you know what? They're definitely like not – like they're going to assess it and learn from it and – move on, and maybe next year we'll get less gigantic ass movies.
And the Russo brothers themselves, I read this really interesting Hollywood Reporter profile with the Russo brothers where they kind of admitted the same thing, that the Electric State was really just a sort of guinea pig to sort of gauge what direction they should go in next. And if anything, they probably overspent on it, so there would be like a clean experiment. What happens when we spend an insane amount of money on a movie? What happens? It's not like it won't really matter one way or the other for this one movie, but in order to chart our next 5 to 10 to 15 years, let's do a really big one and just see what happens, and then we'll know moving forward. They basically admitted that was the point of the Electric State. It was a very, very expensive guinea pig. And I do think that even though this is not going to sink Netflix, And even if they're able to sort of somehow make the numbers make sense on paper for the next board meeting, I don't think they're going to keep doing this. I think this will be probably the beginning of the end of these type of expenditures for them, because like, Joe said, and people have been saying online, when you break the numbers down, this budget is like 53 Anoras, right? They could have made 53 Anoras. Anora this year's Best Picture winner cost $6 million. That's 53 movies they could have made at that scale or at that size. Instead, they made this one movie.
But Netflix would say, yeah, bet. We made thousands of movies this year.
Exactly.
Fucker. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Thanks for the 50 more Anoras. I literally did it. This year we made thousands of movies in 50 territories. So Netflix people can they always have a backup comment,
right?
Because they're so ubiquitous,
right?
So
the comment is well, we did make,
but
right.
The problem with Netflix right now is they won their king and it did work. So I'm going to be annoying right now. You're going to say
no.
against them.
I think the response is we did make 53 Anoras and we made Electric State.
That's what they would say.
You're saying,
That's
yes.
what they would say.
But the bigger problem for them, I think, is the just terrible piss poor quality of the Electric State as a movie. I think is a problem for them. This movie is just getting reviled across the board. I don't give a shit about the Razzies, but this has Razzies written all over it. This is just a big stinking bad movie is the kind of consensus from critics about it, and from viewers as well and audience members and people who love the graphic novel. I think are most pissed off out of anyone because this apparently doesn't remotely resemble the graphic novel, or definitely doesn't resemble the spirit of it. And I think this does pose a problem for Netflix because when you have declining quality and increasing costs, and they have had declining quality, I think, for the most part in their original movies. If you think of Gray Man, Red Notice, Electric
Amelia
State,
Perez.
Sure, but that's not a movie. That's a movie they bought. But in-house paying for producing, right? They really have a quality problem right now, and on top of that, they have increasing subscription prices, and so that's not a business model. That's a developing bubble. When you have increasing costs, increasing prices on your product, and declining quality of that product, that's what creates a bubble. That's when you get real discontent in your customer base.
No doubt that $25.99 a month price is expensive, but they're going to pair it with a $7.99 ad tier, which is going to increase their revenues tremendously over the next 5 years. Preposterously so. I think it's illegal for me to say this, and don't take my advice, but bye.
I dare Netflix to try something in terms of their subscription tiers. In addition to this ad tier thing, I want you to create 2 tiers, Netflix. One where you get everything that Netflix offers. You get the back catalog of all the movies they've acquired and have the rights to, and you get all the Netflix originals. You get Stranger Things, you get Electric State, etc. Then offer a plan where you only get access to all the sort of back catalog of movies and stuff, and you don't get access to the Netflix originals. You don't get access to Stranger Things. You don't get access to the Electric State or Gray Man or any of these movies, any of these Russo Brothers movies. I would sign up for that cheaper plan in a heartbeat. I don't want to be on the. I like Netflix for all the weird sort of documentaries and movies that it's compiled. I like looking through the old Netflix catalog every now and again, but I don't want to be paying for the Stranger Things budget and the Electric State budget. I don't give a shit about these movies and shows. They suck. So do 2 subscription plans. And also do this after the last season of Stranger Things comes out. Then you'll have a real clean experiment for where you stand moving forward, and see how many people sign up for the tier without the Netflix originals. And then you'll know where people stand on your product. Are they there just because you are too big to fail and you're ubiquitous and you have this massive catalog? Or are they dying for the next Russo Brothers movie to come out on the Netflix platform?
I like your plan. I do think they know what works and what doesn't work. And I think the reason that they're not splitting it the way you had is the value of a back catalog is changing. And I think that what you said might not happen necessarily, but you will see a lot more Netflix licensing out their original content to other platforms and streamers. 5 of the 10 most popular movies on Netflix were from other studios, from Warner Brothers and from Universal. And that does suggest that what Brett's saying is true. When these theatrically distributed products come in from other studios, they come in after marketing, after theatrical. People know about these movies and they watch them on Netflix. Netflix doesn't do any of these marketing things. None of us have heard of the Electric State. So those other off-channel titles have value on the Netflix platform, but likewise, Netflix is going to start doing something because what you're saying, that the catalog isn't worth that. And they can make a lot more money on the ads. All of a sudden taking all of Netflix and then adding mid-rolls, that's a great idea. Bye. But the back catalog is invaluable. Like, the reason they're not doing your thing is because it is all garbage. It's all trash. You can make more money giving it to like TV, just like sell our bullshit TV to like bullshit other TV, sell our movies to other streamers that need content like that, and get your stuff out in the ecosystem. You're going to see a lot more of that. The bundling thing, that's not how they're going to play it, obviously.